Welcome to Milestone Moments, the show where we explore the journeys that lead to success. I'm Sheila Slick, your host and founder of 5 Milestones. In every episode, we will bring you insights from the minds of entrepreneurs, leaders, and experts who will share not just their expertise, but the milestone moments that have reshaped their journeys and led to significant achievements. So if you're looking for motivation, you're in the right place. Subscribe now and discover the milestones that mark the path to success. Welcome to another episode of Milestone Moments in Business and Leadership. I'm Sheila Slick, your host. And today, my special guest is Kevin Palmieri, founder and co-host of the Next Level University podcast. Welcome to the show, Kevin.
Sheila, thank you so very much for having me. I'm excited to chat.
I am too, and to learn.
Well,
You're
hopefully,
like a pro.
I was going to say, you're setting me up here. Hopefully, I can live up to the reputation you're creating for me.
Who does your podcast cater to?
Our podcast, and it was never designed this way, this is just kind of how it worked, is we found out that we had a lot of emotionally driven women listening to our show. I don't know if it was the vulnerability or the low self-worth that attracted people, but yeah, we found out pretty quickly it was a lot of women that were listening.
And 1,700 episodes later, we're going to get into some of those insights that you've learned from all of these audience members. What was that pivotal moment that led you to do podcasting, what you do today?
When I was 26, I was, from the outside looking in, very, very, very successful. I had all the measures of success. I had a it was soon to be a 6-figure income. My girlfriend was a model. I had just competed in a bodybuilding show, so I was in the best shape of my life. I had a sports car. I had all the things, all the measures of success. But I was very, very, very miserable. You just never would have known it. I did not believe in myself. I did not understand what self-worth was at all. I felt bad about myself all the time. I was a shell of the person you would have thought I was. And I proceeded to work really, really hard to make as much money as possible because I assumed if I make money, I'll feel really good about myself. Made the most money I'd ever made. And I realized that I lived my life unconsciously. I didn't ever really have a reason to do the things that I was doing. I didn't know why I was doing what I was doing. So I realized that for most of my life, I lived unconsciously. The opposite of unconscious is hyperconscious. So in 2017, when I was 27, I started a podcast called the Hyperconscious Podcast. And I wanted to have cool conversations with cool people. That was it in the beginning. I fell in love with podcasting the second I started, as I fell out of love with my job. I don't want to do this job anymore. I've reached the pinnacle of where I'm going to climb, and it didn't fix any of my problems. I don't want to do it anymore. And I started to get more depressed, and I started to get more anxious, and I started to watch my mental health kind of slip down a darker path as I left for work, and I left for work, and I left for work. And just contextually, my job required a lot of travel. So I was spending weeks on end living on the road, living in sketchy hotels, driving up and down the East Coast of the United States. So one morning, I was working in New Jersey, staying in a sketchy hotel 6 hours away from where I lived. And when I woke up that morning, I sat up and I slid to the edge of the bed and I was lacing up my work boots as I had done 1,000 times before. But that morning, it was like there was 10 televisions on in my head at the same time, and every single one was on a different station, Sheila. One was saying, you're stuck at this job forever. You're never going to leave here and make more money. You know, this is it. You got lucky to get this job. Don't you dare leave this behind. If you ever did leave this job, what would your friends think? You make more money than any of your friends, and there's a lot of significance that comes with that. What would your family say? You're the most successful person in your family by far. It's not close. What's your family going to say? And if you did decide to leave this job, what are you going to do with your life? You're going to be a professional podcaster. That's our fallback plan. That doesn't seem very realistic. And it was in that moment, Sheila, where I thought to myself, well, if I was just to take my life, I would take my problems with me. I wouldn't have to deal with any of this. I wouldn't have to figure it out. I wouldn't have to start over. I wouldn't have to lose my reputation. I wouldn't have to do any of that. Luckily, I have really good people in my life. I'm very blessed. So I reached out to one of them. I explained what was going on. And he said, Kev, over the last couple of years, your environments have remained the same, but your awareness has changed a ton. You're way more aware than you've been, but you're still going and doing the same things you used to do. I think it's time for you to change your environment. So 2018, I left my job and I became a very broke full-time entrepreneur and podcaster trying to figure out how to do this thing. That was the shift for me. I was so depressed. I was so anxious. The necessity was really high for me to take a chance to do something else. And I wanted a podcast. So we gave it a shot. That was the goal, and we gave it a shot.
Oh, well, thank you for sharing that story.
Of course.
And I'm glad that you found that friend, that strength to move forward.
Same.
But it sounds like you didn't just take action that day. It's not like, all right, I'm going to unbutton my boots. I'm going to go launch the podcast. What did that journey look like for you? What were some of the challenges that you had to face, transitioning from, I don't know quite what your career, what you were doing, traveling up and down the coast was, right? Versus starting the podcast, which requires some skills and technical skills, communication skills.
Way more than I had, for sure. I think the hardest things for me, a lot of the hardest parts were the internal stuff. Being broke, obviously, and making money and figuring out how to make money, that was terrible, right? I was very broke, $30,000 in debt. That was terrible. But I realized very quickly that I was somebody who had a ton of self-doubt. And I had almost no belief in myself or my capabilities. And I was wildly insecure. I just never was able to pinpoint that before. So honestly, that was some of the hardest things I had to overcome. Before every time we would do an interview, I always thought, I'm going to ask dumb questions. This person's not going to like me. I'm going to fail. I'm going to make mistakes. It's going to be bad. That ran my life for the first several years. It took me 150 podcast episodes to feel confident as a podcaster. That's a long time to do something before you feel like you're even remotely capable. And I started to realize that I was wildly insecure. It was really hard for me to see somebody very successful and me not to villainize them, not to tear them down, not to imagine that they must have cheated, lied, stealed to get their results that they had. That was a really hard realization because it was about me. It was very personal. Do I like myself? Am I able to like this version of Kev who's super insecure? Sheila, those were the hardest things because they were internal. And when we did start making money, I still had to work on those, right? I still didn't believe in myself. I still had low self-worth. So I would say the two biggest ones were low self-belief and low self-worth. Those are the two biggest things that I dealt with. And I still have minutes and moments where I deal with them today.
So it sounds like your consistency. 150 episodes later, you found that aha moment where you're like, hey, I finally feel comfortable, with the microphone. Yet today when we met, I was like, wow, are you always this, cheery? Because you're a natural. I would have thought you've had all kinds of communication skills training or perhaps a Toastmasters.
I appreciate that. I've just done this. I mean, this is probably my 2900th episode. I've just done this thousands and thousands of times. That's all it is. It's just to speak to the consistency. Yeah, it's the consistency. The reason I am where I am is because I've done it more than other people have, and mostly so I can believe in my own unique ability to do it. It just takes me a long time before it locks in. Like, hey, Kev, maybe you're kind of good at this. You're not as bad as you think. It's one of the hardest things to have self-doubt, but it's also one of the most beneficial things if you can use it as an opportunity to just over prep and over deliver and over practice. So that's an important lesson for everybody, is sometimes what feels like your kryptonite might actually be your superpower if you can flip it.
Yeah, and continue growing and continue learning from our mistakes, because we all make mistakes. So how did you pick your niche? Let's get back to who you serve with your podcast and see what we can learn from your guests and your personal experiences.
Yeah, I don't know if we really picked it. I think when my business partner and I connected, we were just talking about the stuff that we were going through. And a lot of what we were going through was being single and heartbroken and trying to figure out how to be better partners and trying to figure out how to be more confident and try to figure out, why do I struggle with setting boundaries? Oh, does that come from self-worth? Interesting. Why do I currently and constantly run away from rejection? Is that low self-belief? Interesting. So it really became us just trying to talk about, how do we grow as men? And eventually it transitioned into, all right, we're going to talk about consciousness and how to know everything about yourself and be super self-aware. And then eventually that transitioned into, okay, now I feel like we're pretty self-aware. I want to talk about how to become holistically self-aware. Like, when, yeah, that's good. Like, I know myself at a deep level, but how do I know more about relationships? How do I know more about health? How do I know more about wealth? So ultimately our niche now is level up your life, your love, your health, and your wealth. We're the place you go to if you want to get all of those improved. And now we've noticed that it's not just women who listen anymore. Now we have a lot more men that listen, but it's humble humans. People that listen to us are very humble, heart-driven humans. We're unsexy, fundamental self-improvement. I'm not going to hit you with, here's how to become a millionaire tomorrow. It's not going to happen. I'm not going to say, here's how you manifest your dream partner tomorrow. It's not going to happen. We're very unsexy with our stuff, but we're heart-driven, but no BS. Heart-driven, I love you enough to tell you the truth. No BS, I'm going to tell you the real truth, even if it makes me not look so good in the moment. So that's now really what our niche and our brand has become.
So if it's you and your partner, how do you help your audience? Is it just through the podcast? Do you have any other platforms where you take their questions, or do you invite them to be guests on the show?
So the podcast is our free. We do it every day. Always going to be free, value add to the audience. And then from there, we have a Facebook group that gets content in it every day. We have an email list. We do free monthly meetups. We have one-on-one coaching. We have group coaching. We have free courses. We have paid courses. We have an app. We have a bunch of WhatsApp groups. So there is a lot going on behind the scenes. And ultimately, our thought is, no matter where you end up in the business, whether it's always free or always paid, our goal is to add as much value to you as humanly possible. And that's really how we help the community. It's, you work with us with one-on-one, you work with us in group coaching. It really depends on where the person is and where they're trying to get to. But our business is built on adding value. If we're not adding value, we're not helping, and we want to help.
What is your next milestone?
I would say the next milestone is probably when we cross 2,000 episodes. In the beginning, we would celebrate every 50. It's like, episode 50, episode 100, 150. And then I think when we got to 500, we started celebrating every 250. And then when we got to 1,000, it was all right, maybe every 500. And I think as of today, we're at 1770 or 1780. So when we get to 2,000, that'll probably be pretty surreal for me, because that's a lot of episodes. And then after that, probably when we get to another million listens, or at 1.1 million, when we get to 2, that'll be it's weird. I didn't see any of this happening. I didn't predict any of this. This all feels very surreal to me. That's why I try to show up with positive energy all the time, because I'm very grateful. So yeah, 2,000 episodes, 2 million listens. Those will be the next milestones for us.
Well, I love it. No, and you've monetized it. You've turned it into a business way beyond the podcast with everything that you mentioned. So if anyone wants to find out more about you or your business or your podcast, can you share with our audience where they can find you?
Yes, just search Next Level University. You'll see us. We're on all the podcast platforms. Every episode is in 4K on YouTube as well. And then our website is nextleveluniverse.com. Sheila and I had a little giggle behind the scenes. It's Next Level Universe. Somebody wanted a lot of money for the other URL, and we were not willing to pay it at that time. So the podcast is University, website is Universe.
Yes, your branding should all be the same, and I'm still going to.
That is true.
I'm going to help you find that perfect domain. It's just Universe. I typed it in wrong. I'm like, this page doesn't exist.
No, you typed it in right. You did.
So if you could share one out of all of these episodes, all of these people that you've helped, right? And I loved humble humans. I'm wondering why perhaps you don't start a new one or do an episode called Humble Humans, but if you ought to use that title someplace.
I like it.
If you could share a key takeaway or a piece of advice so humble humans can take that next step in their life, what would that be?
Yeah. I remember we interviewed someone early on, and I was like, my goodness, what a story and what a level of adversity that person had to overcome. We'll probably never hear a story like that again. And then the next guest had one very similar. And the next guest had one very similar. And the next guest had one very similar. And eventually, I put together that if you do things the right way in a certain order with a certain belief system and you work on yourself, your adversity can be your advantage. The thing that you're going through right now that is terrible might end up being the thing that you dedicate your life to helping other people avoid in the future. My goal is to be the person that I needed at my lowest point. My adversity became the advantage that then became the purpose. I think it's very similar, and I think it's very appropriate for a lot of people. That was a lesson and a pattern I saw. And all of these people were living in their calling, living in their purpose, living in their mission, trying to help people avoid the stuff that they struggled with. So you might be going through something right now that might end up eventually being the greatest gift you've ever been given, because then it becomes your purpose, your mission, your being. And it might be hard to believe that in the moment, but I know that I would have struggled to believe it as well. And now I am hopefully an example of that. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today.
You're very welcome.
And I encourage everyone to tune in to Next Level University. It's available on the very same platform you're listening to this podcast today to hear more. And thank you all for joining us in another episode of Milestone Moments in Business and Leadership.